So our next story by Chris Van Allsburg is Zathura. And if you remember when you saw the recording of Jumanji yesterday, at the end of the story, the Budwing boys had gone into the park and um, Peter and Judy had watched them pick up the box with the board game and carry it back to their house. And when Judy and Peter were sitting in their house, Mrs. Budwing, the boy's mother, came in. And does anybody remember the one thing that she said about the boys that kind of made Judy and Peter a little bit worried? I'll be curious to see if you remember that. The second thing I want you to notice today is that when we had our little introduction of Chris Van Allsburg's books and about how Fritz turns up in each one of the books, I already showed you where Fritz is in this book. So I'll be curious to see if anybody remembers. After the story is over, I'll go back into the book and show you where he is in case you missed it. Zathura, a space adventure, written and illustrated by Chris Van Allsburg. "Mom!" Danny Budwin yelled. "Mom!" Walter and Danny's mother stopped at her son's bedroom door. "Walter, get off your brother. Honestly, if you don't stop pulling on his nose like that, it'll end up looking like an elephant's trunk." "Oh, yeah?" said Walter. "Then I'll need the ears to match." He let go of Danny's nose and grabbed his ears. "Enough!" Mrs. Budwing shouted. "Danny started it. Look what he did," Walter yelled, picking up his walkie-talkie. The antenna was dangling by a wire. "See? He breaks everything." "I'm sure he didn't mean to," said Mrs. Budwing. "Was an accident," Danny mumbled. From downstairs, Mr. Budwing called to his wife. "We're going to be late." Mrs. Budwing gave her sons a kiss goodbye. "I set some dinner out in the kitchen. Dad and I shouldn't be too late." "Can't you take him with you?" Walter whined. After their parents left, Walter sat down in front of the television. "Can me and you go out and play catch together?" Danny asked. "It's you and I," said Walter. "Not me and you," and the answer is no. Danny really wanted to play. He threw Walter his hat, but Walter just ignored him. And then he tossed him a baseball and beamed him right on the head. Walter jumped up. "All right, you little fungus. You're really going to get it now." Danny bolted out of the room, down the hall, and out the front door, with Walter close behind. They ran into the park across the street, but Danny couldn't outrun his brother. Walter tackled him. "I'm telling," Danny squealed, as Walter got a grip on his nose and pulled. Then he let go. "Hey, what's that?" Right next to the boys was a long, thin box resting against a tree. Walter got off his brother and picked it up. It's just some dumb old game." "Here," he said, poking Danny in the stomach with the box. "It's for babies like you." He trotted off as Danny read the words on the box. "Jumanji, a jungle adventure." Danny stuck the game under his arm and ran home after his brother. Back inside, Danny looked at the box. It was covered with pictures of jungle animals. He took out dice, some tokens, and a very plain game board. Walter was right. It was a babyish game and probably boring now. Danny started to put it away, but he discovered, jammed tightly into the bottom of the box, another board. He banged the box on the floor, and out it popped. This board was more interesting. It showed flying saucers, rockets, and planes in outer space, with a path of colored squares leading from Earth to a purple planet called Zathura and back to Earth. Danny put a token on Earth, then rolled the dice. After he'd moved along the path, something surprising happened. A buzzing sound came from the board, and then with a click, a small green card popped out of the edge right in front of him. He picked it up and read, "Meteor showers. Take evasive action." "Hey, Walter," Danny started to say. "What is V?" when he was interrupted by a noisy sound coming from the roof. Walter looked up from the television. "Holy smoke! Must be a hailstorm." "It's not hail," shouted Danny. "It's meteors." The noise grew louder, like 1,000 golf balls bouncing off the roof. The room got so dark, Walter turned on the lights. And then, kaboom! A rock the size of a refrigerator fell through the ceiling and crushed the television. "See? I told you. Meteors." Walter stared at the hole in the ceiling. "Okay, meteors. But how did it get dark so fast?" Through the hole, he could see what was left of his parents' bedroom, and beyond that, a black, star-filled sky. "It looks like night up there." It's not. It's outer space. What are you talking about? Geez, outer space. Walter muttered as he went to the front door. We just lost track of time. It's night, that's all. He threw open the door and almost took a step outside before he realized there was no outside anymore. At least, not the one he expected. See? Outer space, said Danny. He led Walter back into the living room and showed him the Zathura game card and board. Walter sat down with his head in his hands, gazing at the path of colored squares that wound around the board and ended back at Earth. Looks like, said Danny, we keep on playing or we're up here forever. Great, said Walter. Up here with you forever. He took a deep breath, put a token on Earth, then rolled the dice and moved along the path. The board started buzzing, and then, click, a card popped out. He studied it silently and then tossed the card on the board. Danny leaned forward and read, The polarity on your gravity belt isn't reversed? I wonder what that means. He looked up, but Walter was gone. Walter, he called out. Up here, Walter answered. Danny looked up and saw his brother pressed against the ceiling. I've lost my gravity. That's not all you're going to lose, said Danny nervously, because he could see that Walter was being pulled slowly toward the hole in the ceiling, in a lonely trip into outer space. Walter realized it too and started clawing at the ceiling, but he couldn't keep himself from moving closer and closer to the hole. Danny looked around. Lying next to the meteor was the cord from the shattered television. He tossed it to Walter, who knotted it tightly to his belt, and then Danny grabbed the other end of the cord and tied his brother to the sofa. Danny rolled the dice and moved his token along the path. Click! Out popped another card. Your gyroscope is malfunctioning. Suddenly the house tilted. Everything in the room slid to one side, and Danny got buried under a mountain of furniture. He slowly dug himself up, clutching the game, only to find that Walter was floating back toward the hole in the ceiling. Danny tied him to the sofa again and handed up the dice. Walter rolled and got his gravity back, dropping to the floor with a thud. Danny moved his piece and handed him his card. Your robot is defective, Walter read. From the hallway came the sound of rattling metal and a steady clink, clink, clink. The boys stared at the doorway as a shiny silver robot stepped into view. He was having trouble walking on the tilted floor. His head rotated back and forth, and it seemed to freeze on Walter. The robot's eyes lit up, and he spoke in an odd mechanical voice. Emergency, emergency, alien life form, must destroy. His claw-like hands snapped open and shut. Uh-oh, whispered Danny. I think he's talking about you. Fortunately, when the robot stepped forward, he missed the door, banged into the wall, and fell to the floor. He did that again. He got up and did it again, and then again. Better hurry up and roll, said Walter, before he makes it in here. Danny rolled the dice and took his card. You passed too close to Source 3. Gravity greatly increased. The room began to level out, but something strange was happening to Danny. Walter looked at him. Holy smoke! Danny was getting shorter and wider, too. Soon he was about the shape and size of a large beach ball. Walter, I feel very heavy. Destroy alien life forms, the robot repeated from the hall as he picked himself up again. This time he made it through the door and headed for Walter. Danny yelled to his brother, Push me! What? Push me! Danny yelled out again. Just push me! Walter bent down and gave his brother a shove. Danny rolled across the room and, like a giant bowling ball, knocked the robot over and flattened his legs. Did I get him? Asked Danny, who couldn't see because he'd rolled up against a wall and was upside down. Walter pushed him back to the game board. You sure did, patting his brother's head. You were terrific. Walter picked up the dice and rolled. He took his card, and his hand trembled as he read. Zorgon pirate ship launches photon attack. Through the windows, the boys saw the spaceship. 2 points of light shot from the ship and headed directly for the Budwing house. The first one hit the chimney and set bricks falling into the fireplace. The second one hit the upstairs bathroom. Water began dripping down from the hole in the ceiling. Walter handed the dice to Danny, who was having a hard time lifting his short, heavy arm. He rolled, and as Walter moved his token for him, he slowly returned to his normal shape. A card popped out. Danny read it silently. This is bad. Zorgon pirate boards your vessel. The room upstairs shook as a spaceship banged up against the house. The boys heard the footsteps on the roof. Through the opening in the hole in the ceiling, they saw something or someone climb through the hole in the roof and enter the room above them. Danny and Walter moved to the hallway, standing behind the flattened robot. They held on to each other, too terrified to move. A humming sound came from their feet. They looked down and saw the robot's eyes light up. He lifted his head, fixed his eyes on the hole in the ceiling, and spoke. Alien life form, must destroy. His claw-like hands twitched, but he couldn't get up. Danny and Walter helped him to his feet. He staggered forward as the pirate's scaly tail and lizard-like legs swung down from the hole. The robot lifted one of its claws and snapped it sharply around the creature's tail. The Zorgon howled, jerking himself back through the hole, with the robot still attached. He thrashed and wailed, banging against the walls overhead, and then minus one arm, the robot dropped down through the hole. The boys heard the Zorgon scramble across the roof and saw the flash of his rockets as his ship sped away. It seemed hopeless. The robot's eyes were dark again. They'd been playing for almost 3 hours, and their tokens rested a galaxy away from Zathura and twice that far from Earth. We're never going to make it, said Walter. Sure we are, answered Danny. He handed the dice to his brother. Me and you together, we can do it. Walter cradled the dice in his hand and sighed. You and I, he said wearily. You and I. He looked at his little brother, who was grinning. That's right, said Danny. Together. Do any of your older brothers and sisters do that? They correct your grammar sometimes. Walter rolled the dice, a 1 and a 2. He moved his token toward the only black square on the board. A card popped out. You have entered a black hole, Walter read. Go back in time, 1 hour for each mark on the dice. He jumped up and looked around the room. You see any black holes? His brother pointed to the floor. A black spot was slowly spreading under Walter's feet like a perfectly round puddle of ink. At first, Walter thought that he was sinking into it, but it was the hole that was rising. He tried to run, but he could not feel his feet. And then as the hole rose higher, he couldn't feel his legs either. What's going on? He cried. Danny looked below the disc-like hole. Walter, he said, the bottom part of you is gone. The hole rose higher and higher, and there was less and less of Walter until only his head remained. Danny tried to pull on the hole to save what was left of his brother, but his hands passed through the blackness as if it were made of smoke. His chin dropped to his chest, and he began to cry. Danny, Walter called softly. Danny looked up at his brother's floating head. Danny, I never told you this, but I... And that was all he got to say, because the hole kept on rising past his mouth, his nose, and finally right up over the top of his head. Walter was completely swallowed up, floating through in empty darkness. He closed his eyes as he began to spin, plunging head over heels through pitch-black space. And then, thud, he landed hard on his knees. There was something in his arms, something wriggling around. He opened his eyes and found himself back in the park by his house. He had an arm wrapped tightly around Danny's neck and a hand gripping the boy's nose. I'm telling, Danny squealed. Walter let go and fell back on the grass. He was dizzy, very dizzy. Danny jumped up and started to run, but stopped. Hey, what's that? He went to a tree and picked up the box resting against the trunk. He held the box out to Walter. Look, some kind of game. Walter grabbed it. Hey, give it back. His big brother got to his feet. You don't want to play this, he said. Trust me, I tried it once. He went over to the trash can and jammed the box deep inside. Come on, I've got a better idea. Let's go play catch. Danny smiled. You mean together, me and you? Walter put his arm around his shoulder. Yep, that's right. Me and you, together. So, boys and girls, I'm curious to find out whether or not anybody figured out how Walter ended up back at home. I can't wait to hear what you come up with when I see you next Wednesday. Oh, and in case you didn't see him or don't remember from when we did our introduction yesterday, there is Fritz. up on the shoulder, sitting inside that toy car.